Our next presenter will be Professor Thorton Lockwood of the Philosophy Department on Atomism without microscopes.
Thank you. So it was Plato who said that there is an enduring quarrel between philosophy and poetry, and clearly I am not even going to try to. Oh wait, where did it go? I'm not even going to try to unseat the poet as a philosopher, but I am going to try to make a little sense of a philosopher you this evening. So my research and some of my teaching is in ancient Greek philosophy, and ancient Greek philosophy is, if you like, a bit of conceptual detective work. So what we often have is texts, we have treatises, we have little snippets from an author, and the challenge is to try to figure out what these thinkers are saying. The one who I'm focusing on tonight is an individual named Epicurus. And to give you a sense of the problem we have with Epicurus, so, here's my stage props. These are the collected works of Plato. And, you can see this is pretty hefty. This would keep a door open, even if there was a pretty hefty wind or something like this. So this is more than the collected works of Epicurus, because there's actually a lot of commentary in here. You do the collected works of Epicurus, you're looking at something like about maybe 40 or 50 pages or so maximum. Now, this is not because Epicurus didn't write a lot. He actually wrote profusely, but his works don't survive. And so the challenge that we have as people who study ancient philosophy is to try to figure out, based on the text that we do have, what does he mean? Now, like any detective, we have clues. And in the case of Epicurus, one of the most interesting clues is a series of manuscripts that are becoming available to us from a city called Herculaneum, which is in Italy, and which has the bad fortune of being very close to Mount Vesuvius. Mount Vesuvius being a volcano which in the first century of the Common Era erupted. What happened in Herculaneum from Mount Vesuvius is that not just Herculaneum, but Herculaneum was a city that was completely covered over with ash. So everything within it was covered literally with tens of hundreds of feet of ash and molten lava and so forth. One of the buildings that we know was at Herculaneum is a so-called Villa Papyri. This is a reconstruction of what it looks like, and you can see that this is almost like a temple to learning, and this is what it looks like today. And yes, this is sort of like a cut into the ground, and everything above it is what was sort of brought down on it by Mount Vesuvius. Now, what classicists and archaeologists are doing today is they are extracting from these archaeological records scrolls that were completely encased in lava. And these are examples of some of them. Now, these scrolls have been available since roughly the middle of the 18th century. So the 18th century way of trying to uncover what these scrolls said was literally to sort of cut into them and to try to unfold them and sort of unpack what's in there. And the first slide I gave you, this is actually a picture of what that looks like. I'll come back to this phrase in a second, the so-called tetrapharmakos. It's an Epicurean phrase, which I'll put up on a screen. But what we have now, and this picture actually comes from the New York Times in January of this year, there's scientists who are using laser technology to basically read what is inside the scrolls, and what they're finding is many of the lost Epicurean texts. So one of these lost Epicurean texts is the so-called tetrapharmakos. The period when Epicurus is writing, one of the characteristic ways of writing then is, for lack of a better term, the fortune cookie philosophy. In other words, what I mean by that is philosophers would articulate their philosophy in a series of very pithy maxims. The reason being is that a practitioner of this philosophy could memorize these, could internalize these. Now, the philosophy is much, much broader than that. So in other words, the tetrapharmakos, and this comes from a fellow named Philodemus, who's a student of Epicurus. He said, don't fear God, don't worry about death. What is good is easy to get. What is terrible is easy to endure. And the Epicurean student was meant to memorize these, to internalize these. Now, what we have lost is something like, well, what does that mean? I mean, don't fear God, that's 2 words in an article. To try to unpack them, we need to try to get other sources. But as I said, the idea was to internalize these things, or if you like, inscribe them on your back, although this isn't the ancient practice, this is the modern practice. There's certainly some sense, though, that what this person is doing is similar to what the Epicurean follower would do. I want to make this part of me. And as I said, so one of the pieces of the puzzle is that the manuscripts that are coming available from Herculaneum, the so-called Tetrapharmakos is one of them that gives us insight to what it was that Epicurus was doing. Now, there's another work that survived to the 15th century. We have many, many copies of it. This is Lucretius's De Rerum Natura, or On the Nature of Things. And this gets us more into what the title of my talk was about with respect to atomism. So, as I said, Epicurus is a philosopher who espoused the doctrine of atomism, that everything in the world is composed of atoma, indivisible small little particles. Now, this is familiar to us, but we think of atoms as things that we study under electron microscopes, or we think of, sort of electron here and positron there and neutrons there and so forth. And of course, classical science does not have a microscope. It doesn't have any means of looking at the atoms. And yet, nonetheless, we have this philosopher, Epicurus, who grounds an entire ethical philosophy on the belief in atomism. Now, again, why would any ethical philosopher ever embrace atomism? When we turn to Lucretius, we get another clue. And again, it's sort of like what we're finding in the scrolls at Herculaneum, but it's a different clue. In the case of Lucretius, he writes an entire book in verse, as poetry, of science, trying to explicate these 6 claims. Now, again, in 4 minutes, I'm not going to even try to do justice to this. But the first 2, nothing comes into being from what is not, nor disappears into what is not. In other words, matter is such a form that it is never created, but nor is it never annihilated. It always exists in its atomic constituents. It comes into the form of composites, and of course, we're composed of that matter. But again, strictly speaking, the atoms from which we are composed always will, always have existed. Now, the second one that I focus on is this second claim, that the totality is made of bodies and the void. Again, that everything is atoms and the void. Now, the challenge is to say, how do you go from an Epicurean philosophy, which says something like, and this is to go beyond the 4-minute limit, it's a philosophy that holds out pleasure is the highest good, and a life that is absent from pain is the best possible life. How do you go from that, for instance, to the claim that one should not fear God, that's what you're finding, like say, for instance, when I put the Tetrapharmakos up, to the claim that everything is atoms in the void, and the atoms are never created and never annihilated. How do they fit together into a single philosophy? For more information, Philosophy 332, Ancient Philosophy, I teach it every fall. There's other things that we read, including Plato and Aristotle, but no way in 4 minutes am I doing atomism and hedonism and Herculaneum, and thank you very much.